what's going on with this debt ceiling thing.
It's the worst kept secret on earth that Republicans were going to use the debt limit for their ideological ends.
It's David Dayen time. Okay, let's do it. David Dayen is from the American Prospect, a wonderful, it's a great publication. Been around for a very long time. They do incredible work. They actually do end up suggesting pretty solid policy proposals to the Democratic Party, which the Democratic Party sometimes actually follows through on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Dayen. You guys already know he's our favorite boomer.
I am not a boomer.
They call me a boomer. I'm a boomer too. Anyone who's not a zoomer is a boomer. Regardless, you're here. You're going to educate us on what's going on with this debt ceiling thing. We don't understand it. What is a debt ceiling?
Right. Congress appropriates money to spend all the time, whether it's on war or on Medicare, or appropriates money and says, we're allowed to spend this. Obviously, almost every year in the existence of the United States, Congress does not take in as much money as goes out. So in order to cover that spending, the U.S. borrows money. They sell bonds to national investors, and they borrow money. For the longest time in America, every time the government wanted to borrow money, Congress had to affirmatively vote to allow that. Every bond Congress had to vote for. In 1917, Congress said, okay, you can just go do your bond selling, your borrowing operations. However, we're going to put a limit on how much you can borrow, and that is called the debt limit. That can be raised, but only by an act of Congress. 80 times, I believe, over the last 80 years, Congress raises the debt limit to allow for more borrowing to cover the spending that they have already put in place. Congress has already appropriated money, said, we're going to spend money on this, and all the borrowing is paying those bills. You've already spent the money, you've already paid for the goods and services, and it's just a matter of paying those bills. About 10 years ago, Republicans had an idea, and that idea was, this is something that the country really needs to happen, because if you don't increase the debt limit, the country runs out of money, it goes into default, it would be financial calamity. So in Republican brain, they thought, this is an opportunity. This is a shot. This is a weapon. We can use this to extort things that we wouldn't normally get through the regular legislative process. Unfortunately, Barack Obama played along with that. In 2011, he said, okay, let's have a negotiation on a grand bargain to cut the deficit.
Brilliant.
He had this negotiation with John Boehner, who was the House Speaker at the time. Ultimately, it was only thanks to the Tea Party balking at more tax increases that didn't go through. What we ended up with was this sort of second order thing called the sequester, where they just cut spending across the board. And it actually had a really debilitating effect on the recovery from the Great Recession. Flash forward to now, Republicans, same situation. They have the House, Democrats have the Senate, Democrats have the White House. House Republicans think, hey, great opportunity. Now we're going to hijack the government again, hijack the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, hijack the global economy, and say, you got to give us some stuff. And that's the only way we're going to raise the debt limit.
So what happens if we don't pay these debts?
So we go into default, our credit rating goes down, just like if you didn't pay your credit card, right? Similar thing with the government. We would owe much more money later. In the short term, what would happen, we literally don't have the money in the U.S. Treasury to pay the obligation that we have coming right now. So on June 1st, there's Social Security payments supposed to go out. Contractors get paid. There are millions of payments made almost on a daily basis to meet the obligations of the U.S. government. And some of those payments would stop. It's actually uncharted territory because the U.S. has never gone into default before. Any number of things could happen from, okay, we don't have enough money to pay everything on June 1st, so we're going to wait until revenues come in. And then when that money comes in, we'll pay the June 1st bills. And then we'll wait until we get enough money to pay the June 2nd bill. So, people rely on these things, right? That would be really catastrophic. Payments to people who work in the government. You're talking about payments to contractors, payments like veterans benefits and Social Security payments, and your payments, reimbursements for Medicare and Medicaid, food stamps. I mean, it's literally everything the government does that they pay for would be, imperiled, at least in the short term, until an agreement was made. After the Civil War, there were payments that were owed. And the Confederate, the conservatives of their day said, maybe we'll just obviate those payments. We won't pay them. And so the Civil War amendments to the Constitution, one of them being the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, they put in a little proviso, and the sentence says, the validity of the public debt shall not be questioned. What that means for today is many people have made the argument that it is actually unconstitutional for the president to not pay off these obligations that have already been laid out by Congress. If you think about it, what it forces the president to do, if we hit that, the president will have to pick and choose what things to pay and what things not to pay. Congress, they are supposed to set the rules on what gets paid and what doesn't. But under the debt ceiling statute, if we run out of money, the president now has to do that. There is a case in Boston, the National Association of Government Employees, which are, government workers who are threatened by hitting the debt ceiling, of not getting paid, of being fired, being furloughed. They have filed suit in federal court in Boston, and they have said that the debt ceiling is unconstitutional, and we're harmed by it if we ever hit that. In fact, we're harmed right now because what essentially has happened is we've already hit the debt ceiling. We did it back in January, and the Treasury Department, to conserve cash, has engaged in what they call extraordinary measures to try to, have enough cash to pay the bills. The government employees who rely on those funds for their retirement have said, look, you're costing us money right now because you hit the debt limit. And actually, this law that created the debt limit is unconstitutional. So why don't you just get rid of it? And so that's what they're asking a federal judge to do.
So let's talk about what other things that the Democrats could have done that they failed to do. Because if I recall correctly, Tim Kaine in the membrane, came out and criticized the Democratic Party and said, why didn't we knew that this was going to inevitably happen. Why didn't we utilize the lame duck time frame that we could have to actually deal with this when we had the numbers?
It's the worst kept secret on earth that Republicans were going to use the debt limit for their ideological ends. Like, they did not make a secret of this at all. Before the 2022 election, they were saying things like, oh, yeah, we think this is a good idea. This is a way for us to, stop this runaway spending. They said it over and over and over and over again. And there really weren't any defectors from that. It was the entire Republican Party that was saying, we are going to use this tool if we get the chance. And so, forget about just in the lame duck session of 2022, going back to 2011, when this happened before and almost strangled the economy. Democrats, at every step of the way, they could have taken steps to either raise the debt limit to a kajillion dollars, raise it to a number like Denmark. Denmark is the only other industrialized nation that even has a debt limit like this, and they have it at an impossibly high number that they'll never reach, so it's never a problem. They could have done a number of things. The budget reconciliation process can be used to increase the debt limit.
Of course.
It was done in the 1980s and 90s.
We would have still had the same villains in the Democratic Party that could have potentially also posed the threat to utilizing the budget reconciliation.
Well, it's why they didn't. I mean, they
Kirsten
said
Sinema,
Joe
Joe Manchin, Bob Menendez, Maggie Hasan. So the Democratic Party sucks. It almost seems like they don't care if austerity measures are implemented. Even when they are in a position of power to do something, it feels like it's better for the Republicans to react and force austerity measures so that they can just, throw their hands at the side and say, oh, we just had to preserve the sanctity of these institutions.
I mean, you have to say there's some complicity there, certainly on the part of the Democrats. Let's talk about what is on the table, what we're actually talking about in this deal. So it looks like they're going to freeze federal spending at the current level, non-defense discretionary budget. The defense budget will rise.
Wait, what?
You got to support troops, right? That's going to go up. But the non-defense discretionary budget, which is kind of everything else, not Social Security, not Medicare, not Medicaid, that's all mandatory spending.
Yeah.
This is discretionary spending where Congress can say, okay, we'll choose not to do this. It's really a tiny part of the budget. It's only about 13% of the overall U.S. budget is in the non-defense discretionary side of the ledger. As soon as you started negotiating, you were going to get a bad deal. And this is a bad deal. Relative to what we were hearing before, it's actually gotten a fair bit better. Now, let's talk about some of the other things that are in this deal. They're going to take money that was given under the Inflation Reduction Act to the Internal Revenue Service. The IRS was given $80 billion to modernize its operations, to actually answer the phone, to hire enough people, and also to audit the rich, which the IRS hasn't been doing very often lately.
I don't like that.
Right. Well,
But
Republicans really don't like that. I mean, maybe you don't like it either, but Republicans really don't like it.
no, I love it.
They have yelled about, there are going to be 87,000 IRS agents running around, poking into all your financial records, et cetera.
Well,
So
they thought that they were going to come with guns to their houses, like the
right.
87,000 armed IRS. They weren't going to be nerd
drag
number
you away.
crunchers.
Yeah,
They're coming for
exactly.
your jet ski.
So anyway, in this deal, as we've heard about it, 10 billion of that $80 billion would be taken away. Here's how ridiculous this is. If you take $10 billion away from the IRS, you're taking away the ability for them to collect revenue. You're
Yeah.
actually adding to the deficit. This is supposed to be all about deficit reduction, but you're actually going to add to the deficit by taking that money away from the IRS.
Yeah, I don't get it. Isn't that, every dollar spent on the IRS is actually returning more dollars to the American government's coffers, right? So how does that work?
About $6 for every dollar. So
Interesting.
here are these fiscally responsible Republicans who have demanded that we increase the deficit by making it easier for rich people to cheat on their taxes. That's part of this deal. Another part of the deal is changes to the permitting process for large infrastructure, make it a little easier to permit fossil fuel infrastructure like pipelines and oil drilling and things like that. So we're going to pollute the earth as part of this emerging deal. And then the last thing is increasing what are called work requirements for federal benefit programs like TANF, which is the welfare program, temporary assistance for needy families, and also the SNAP program, supplemental nutrition assistance program, sometimes it's called food stamps. The only reason that you would increase work requirements so that someone has to work 30 hours a week in order to get this food aid is it's really a way to kick people off the program. So that's what the emerging deal is. And none of it is what any sane person would actually do. But Republicans are essentially holding a gun to the head of the U.S. economy, the global economy, and saying, you got to do this.